The Al-Qaeda network is considered by the CIA to be an intelligence asset, and intelligence assets are controlled by their sponsors. That does not, of course, mean that Al-Qaeda is necessarily pro-American. It means that Al-Qaeda is being used to perform certain functions for the US intelligence apparatus. And it goes through a whole complex group of intermediaries. And that's why Pakistan's military intelligence has played a very important role in that context. It's important to understand that the man who, according to the FBI, is considered to be the so-called money man behind the 9/11 terrorists. I'm talking about the head of Pakistan's military intelligence, Mohammed Ahmad.
In the aftermath of 9/11, the FBI confirmed that General Ahmed, then head of Pakistan's ISI, had authorized a $100,000 wire transfer to Muhammad Atta, the alleged ringleader of the terrorist hijackers.
Well, this same individual was on an official visit to Washington from the 4th to the 13th of September, and he met Colin Powell, Richard Armitage, George Tenet, his counterpart. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, if the money man behind 9/11 is in Washington meeting top officials and at the same time sending money to the terrorists, doesn't it sound, what is the proximity group of this individual from the sociological point of view, okay? He has links with the terrorists, he has links with the Bush administration. He's buddy-buddy with George Tenet, he's buddy-buddy with Mohammed Atta. Does that not suggest that senior Bush officials should at least give us some answers of what they were doing with this guy?
Unanswered question number 6. Were there plans for a war in Central Asia prior to September 11th?
This war was coming for a long time. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, but who also worked in intelligence roles for Presidents Reagan and Bush 1, co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He wrote a book in 1997 called The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. And in 3 specific places in that book, he says the key to America's control of the world in the 21st century is the control of Eurasia.
In support of his thesis, Brzezinski states, a power that dominates Eurasia would control 2 of the world's 3 most advanced and economically productive regions, and about 3/4 of the world's known energy resources.
And then he says that without an attack on the order of Pearl Harbor, or without a direct external threat, there was no way that the American people would support the imperial mobilization necessary to control Central Asia. And in this book, again, written in 1997, Brzezinski had a map of where the next world conflict was going to be. And you look at this map in the book, and it's exactly where we're fighting now.
Unanswered question number 7. Is there an underlying motive, besides the war on terror, for the U.S. military presence in Central Asia? Peter Dale Scott has written extensively about hidden agendas in U.S. foreign policy.
There are people in the administration who believe out and out that this is the American century, that it is the time for American hegemony. Both Republicans and Democrats have said we shouldn't worry so much about what our allies think.
Despite a lack of support from America's traditional allies, the Bush administration continues to pursue military action in Central Asia.
But it's, I think, pretty clear now to everybody that America has a oil geostrategy in that part of the world.
The U.S. National Energy Policy Report of 2001, authored by Vice President Dick Cheney, formerly one of America's richest and most powerful oil industry executives, demanded a priority on easing U.S. access to Persian Gulf oil supplies.
America needs to control the world oil system. And the fact that we have put U.S. troops in Georgia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, even in Kyrgyzstan, 200 miles from the West Chinese border, all those troops there are nominally in the name of fighting the terrorists, but in reality, they have established an American presence in the great oil basin of the Caspian. and people more and more admitting that America is a serious player in that area now because of the troops we put in.
On October 6, 2002, the UK Observer reported, the Bush administration, intimately entwined with the global oil industry, is keen to pounce on Iraq's massive untapped oil reserves, the second biggest in the world after Saudi Arabia's. Unanswered question number 8. Is there any historical evidence to suggest that the government may have used the 9/11 attacks to justify its war in Central Asia? Alex Jones is a television and radio broadcaster who has publicly questioned the Bush administration's version of what happened on September 11th.
Governments always get caught engaging in terrorist attacks against their own populations to rally them for war or for a domestic crackdown. We saw William McKinley's Navy in the 1890s blowing up their own ship in Havana Harbor as a pretext for war with the Spanish government. And that's now admitted fact. We saw Adolf Hitler blow up his own Reichstag as a pretext for martial law. Firebomb their own capital. Nazi documents have been released, now a part of historical record. Then, of course, we saw December 7th with the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor. It's now been released that 12 days before, they had Admiral Yamamoto's communique that the Japanese were going to be attacking Pearl Harbor. One of the best examples we have of the U.S. government planning terrorist attacks against its own institutions is the Northwoods document. This is a confirmed, admitted document, declassified just a few years ago.
In Body of Secrets, his best-selling expose of the National Security Agency, author James Bamford revealed that Operation Northwoods called for innocent people to be shot on American streets, for a wave of violent terrorism to be launched in Washington, D.C., and for a U.S. ship to be blown up in Guantanamo Bay, all in an effort to galvanize American public support for a war against Cuba.
And they say in the Northwoods document, casualty list in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of indignation. We certainly saw a helpful wave of indignation after September 11th.
Unanswered question number 9. How has the government's reaction to the terrorist attacks impacted the rule of law in the United States? John Judge is a member of the Washington Peace Center and has researched the post-9/11 effects on U.S. civil liberties.
As of September the 11th, the entire country went into continuity of government, which is a special government that does not rely on the elected representatives, but in fact puts a small group of people in power. When you go into a declared war or a state of national emergency, which is what they went into on September 11th, legal authorities change. Hundreds of laws allow new power and new authorities for a select few people. Decisions are made not by the overt government, but by now an acknowledged shadow government. That's who's making these decisions, is DOD, FEMA, and the NSA. That's who's running the country since September 11th. They're not making it very visible, but they studied conventional explosives and weapons, chemical and biological weapons, and nuclear weapons as a three-stage approach to terrorism and counterterrorism, and at each of those levels they laid out maps that would take away more and more of the civil liberties. Eventually, when you go to martial law or into these emergency situations, they can set up detention camps and go into certain neighborhoods and round people up. The highway system, the phone system, communications, mass media, mail, all come under offices of emergency preparedness and military control once you go into these scenarios.
Unanswered question number 10. How has recent legislation, like the Patriot Act and Homeland Security Bill, affected the lives of American people? Reva Entine is an executive director of the National Lawyers Guild.
One of the greatest ironies, along with the tragedy of the Patriot Act, is that it's called Patriot. In fact, it is patriotic to defend the Constitution, and what the Patriot Act does is dismantle the Constitution.
In October 2001, the USA Patriot Act was passed into law, granting unprecedented levels of power to the Justice Department.
The greatest thing that it did is it created a new federal crime of domestic terrorism.
Under the Patriot Act, a definition of domestic terrorism is activities that involve acts dangerous to human life, that violate the laws of the U.S. or any state, and appear to be intended to influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion.
That's domestic terrorism. Now, intimidation or coercion are very mild words when you think about it. What about people going out on strike? What about Rosa Parks sitting in the front of the bus? What about the sit-ins at the lunch counters? Those are all intended to intimidate or coerce government institutions. And if somebody had the possibility of being injured as a result, that would have been domestic terrorism. Martin Luther King would have been a domestic terrorist.